So, we're here today in front of the camera to try to explain to people why exactly we're making these sort of micro short films, what the goals behind them are, why people should care, rather than just throwing out a whole bunch of stuff, because that's obviously not quite our reason. We have that whole list of rules, but let's be honest, no one's going to go read that whole thing.
Right.
So like trying to just explain to someone that's new to the channel or someone that wants to learn why we do this, what we're doing and why.
Right. Yeah, and I think when we kind of came up with these ideas for the sketches, we wanted to focus on kind of streamlining the creative process of it and trying to get more ideas out into the world faster, so we could understand and learn from them.
Yeah.
You know, so I think in doing this, it's an exercise to think about how both of our brains work first and foremost, and both of our trajectories as filmmakers, learning from each other in those different trajectories, as well as, you know, everything technical that happens afterwards, editing, sound, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Those are all things that we can jump off of. So
There's a physical process that it's teaching us, because if you've read the rules, if you've looked at any of that, pretty much whoever directs it is supposed to shoot it and edit as well, unless one of us is acting, in which case, you know, that rule gets a little bit nebulous. But the idea is to always be doing pretty much all parts of the process yourself. Just have to learn it, and then there's that more like conceptual, spiritual, philosophical side of things, which says we both think very differently, and it would challenge us to work outside of our boxes and maybe find new boxes that we're interested in, or just to challenge us and say, let's keep trying to generate ideas, and maybe one of those ideas will end up being something great or interesting.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's interesting. Is like the concept of like, I guess like reproducibility and being able to bring many ideas to the forefront in a fast manner. Because I think before being challenged by this kind of framework, manifesto, whatever you would want to call it, I would kind of fixate on ideas a little bit too long, and so I think this is a good way to kind of get out of that habit and get more, like, kind of disassociate a bit from thinking I need to like have something like perfected and just get behind the camera, get into the software, start cutting, start editing, and not to mention obviously just trying to flesh out an idea in like a week's time, you know. So that challenges me to do
Sit
that.
down and do it.
Sit down and do it, and then also, you know, hopefully creates, you know, content for other, you know, filmmakers to understand that it's all kind of an iterative process, filmmaking and writing scripts and stuff like that. Like you're always going to start, and personally I start with kind of fragmented ideas, so it's a good start for me. And I think, like you said, like one of them is bound to have
Something, a nugget of something
that would take you into a narrative or documentary or you know, experimental or whatever.
Yeah, and I think you hit upon like part of the main goal, because obviously a lot of what we've been talking about so far is like how it helps us and how we think about it. But with that first little bit, it was also, it helps to free up and to demonstrate just how different the same idea can be done by two people, because obviously there's the side of it that helps us, but there's also the side that was more front-facing. And then I think you hit upon a key point whenever you were talking just there about filmmaking, just in general. I mean, all art form in general is very much like the product you're supposed to put out is supposed to be completely finished and very well done. But I've always felt that there's a little bit more leeway in like painting and drawing and stuff, where you can do sketches that aren't fully finished but hold a unique value, or at least something to do. Whereas in filmmaking, you're expected to put out a short film, you're expected to put out a full feature film that sort of showcases this whole level of production and polish, which is hard to achieve, and it's especially hard to achieve whenever you're working on small budgets, no budgets, or you don't have a lot of time, but you're trying to practice the craft and get better. So I've always found that a little bit damaging to have that sort of idea that it has to be absolutely perfect, and that by doing this, it's to sort of free ourselves up from that stereotype of, oh, we gotta spend, you know, months and months. I just came off of a short film that I spent months and months and months editing, as you know. And just to sort of get away from that and say, okay, so obviously even that wasn't perfect, but you're working toward that perfection there. What if instead we backed away from the perfection and we said, let's just make as much as possible, as quick as possible, but still make it good, obviously. Still try for perfection, but admit that there's always gonna be mistakes, always gonna be roughness, and that's just part of the process to normalize that more. So more people get out there and will pick up a camera and create, and don't be afraid that, oh, the idea might not work to X, Y, and Z, or someone might not like it, or this might not be fully fleshed, but say, no, just go out there and shoot it and get it done. And I think that's sort of key.
Yeah, and I agree. I think I'm just kind of thinking about the two films that are on the channel.
Yeah.
And just kind of how fast they were made and how you know, I've already learned so much about, you know, different technical aspects that you know, either I've learned or I've been refreshed on, but this is a constant kind of refresher, and it allows you to kind of revisit those same skills again and again, and then be able to see, okay, this is where I'm lacking. I should learn a little bit more about grading, or I should learn a little bit more about mixing, or whatever it is. And, you know, coming from this kind of space, which is, you know, super independent, super, you know, kind of like do everything yourself, you know, shoot, edit, you know, sound, all that within the prompt of these sketches. I think that that's a good place to start, and I think a lot of filmmakers should consider trying to just do everything, because they need to see the process. They need to, albeit it's very micro, zoomed in, kind of
Execution just super
Right.
super close.
right. It's a very small snippet of like what the industry would be like working with a huge team, but at least you know how to record at proper like levels, and how to set up lights and stuff like that. If you have this gear, which, you know, we have some, and our gear isn't extensive, but that's not the point. The point is to get out and just do it. And whether like some other people make their own kind of guides or manifestos that say, hey, we can only use natural light, or we can only use you know, whatever scene, location, you know, and that's something that we've been kind of
The restraints are massive.
Exactly.
Because the goal with some of these, especially with the prompts, I think, is not just to see where our brains go, but it's also to restrain and constrain ourselves. Because obviously you can sit there and just not only ponder the idea of what the story's gonna be about, but how you're gonna shoot it for hours and hours and hours. But if you give yourself those like more niche criteria, like the last one we did, it has to be all in monologue. It's like, okay, so we're not gonna have any dialogue then, it has to be a monologue. So then that obviously cuts off a lot of the stories you can tell, and you say, what's interesting about a monologue? What can I do in a monologue that we can't do in dialogue? And so it sort of helps you to distill ideas down to a certain point, and then sort of cut off any fat that would be, you know, distracting you otherwise, where you get sort of wheel spinning in the idea of the execution, not just in the concept. But
exactly, it's really all about executing to your best, the best ability that you have within the time frame, and also to not be so attached to these ideas, as they're not going to be submitted to festival circuits. They're not going to be you know, if anything, they are a library of ideas to kind of reference, and to kind of have the, you know, impressionable like mark that like going through that idea kind of left, and then you can revisit it, you know, however it is that you organize your archive, your images, or your, you know, whatever it is that you're doing, how you organize your ideas for future films.
Yeah, and I think our perspective, we obviously have a little bit more experience in film. We didn't go to film school or anything like that. I studied film criticism mainly, and I know you did film stuff for a while, but neither of us did it really professionally. That is my job currently, is doing film stuff, so I'm technically a professional, but not at that Hollywood level of production or anything like that. So this very much is how I learned, was through making small shorts, but then this is sort of to intensify that process and make it a lot more. You have to get your boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And I think maybe not for us, but maybe for other people, if they were to follow this, I think this could be an interesting attempt at a film school, because obviously you still have to teach yourself all this stuff. You still have to know how to adjust the aperture and do all that sort of stuff that comes before this.
Right.
But even then, I feel like the most learning is done whenever you start shooting and start making mistakes.
Right.
And so I think that this could be a sort of film school without film school in a way, just a trial by fire, especially if you release it. If you keep it to yourself, you know, you're not going to get as much of a benefit out of it. Our hope with releasing these is that not only do they show where we came from later, but also serve as sort of a blueprint for other people to say, put your sketches out there so they can get critiqued, because you're not really going to have a great time if you're just sort of keeping it to yourself. Maybe your buddies are all going to say they love it because, you know, they're your buddies. But putting it out there so other people can see, critique, comment, and maybe you can say, oh, they really like this one aspect. Why do they like this? Or why do they hate this?
Right.
And so I think that's an important aspect, that this could be a trial by fire of film school.
Yeah.
And I guess that's sort of a hope for ourselves and for others, less for ourselves, but more for others. But
yeah, and I think that's a good aspiration, I guess, to have for this kind of channel and for the sketches in general. Just the general kind of concept is to like have a place to where everybody can kind of submit different ideas, get critiqued, and ultimately kind of push in that indie space their vision forward towards, even if it was just, oh, somebody commented and said change this and I changed that and then I made it and then 2 people watched it, but that's fine. At least
that one person helped you.
Yeah, and you're understanding that there was something there to learn, and so it's really kind of constant iteration and learning process about storytelling.
Yeah.
Filmmaking.
With or without people, no matter what.
Right.
And so I think, to quickly summarize, I think all of our goals were to see what 2 minds do with the same idea, and not both execution-wise and then just general concept-wise, to force ourselves to create, and then to also just sort of play with the idea of sketches, as the channel is called Sketches in Time, to play with the idea that other mediums release their sketches. It's something that you're known to do. They're not supposed to be complete. It's just supposed to be something of a still life or something like that. And yet film has that pressure, so try to remove some of that pressure and do something totally opposite. Say we're releasing all of our B sides, pretty much, our C sides, our D sides, the stuff that wouldn't have made the cut, that we wouldn't have spent a full amount of time on, but here we're releasing them to sort of free up that stigma, with the hopes that more people would feel free to create new ideas.
Right.
And in the process of creating new ideas, educate themselves and others a little bit more. I think that's sort of the broad, very high and lofty aspirations of this, because obviously we're very small, but still just to provide that blueprint, even if it doesn't turn out to be something for other people, just even for ourselves, just to be working in that mindset.
Right. Yeah, and I think you when you said B, C, D, E, F, G sides, I was like, okay, that kind of clarified it in a little bit more for me. I mean, even though I understand clearly what we're doing, it's like, okay, here's my X side. Like, boom.
I was tired this week, and we were supposed to make something about a cup, and I was too tired, and I just filmed a cup for 2 minutes, and I submitted it,
and exactly. And it's like, okay, the idea, okay, it's like, even if, you know, that's the concept, here's the cup, and I'm just doing this for a minute, like, there's an idea there. That's all that matters, is to kind of explore at the very root what the idea is saying. And I think this channel gives us the ability to kind of boil off all the excess noise to be able to see what
interests us or what we feel like we need to learn. Because you could take the cup and I could make it a whole thing of, I want to see how this light plays with this cup. And so my thing becomes a study on light, and yours becomes, I want to work on sound design, so I'm going to throw the cup at a whole bunch of things and see what different noises it makes and record it.
Or I could just knock this cup over and be like, okay, you know.
There's no rules, so whatever we want to teach ourselves, whatever we find interesting, an idea technically or conceptually, we can just execute. And YouTube gives us the way to release it. And with digital formatting and all that, we have instantaneous access on our phones, on our Blackmagic, to whatever we have to pretty much shoot it for practically no money and only time. and just turn it out and just see what happens, really.